and sisters? Oh, there's some people awake. I know it was an early start, wasn't it? Okay, so we're going to consider then Nehemiah building together. Today we're going to consider a remarkable man, Nehemiah, whose diary's been left in the part of scriptures for us to consider. A man of faith, a man who sought God's blessing, but separating unto God, because that's what it was. It was the process, as we shall see, and dealing really with the challenges of ungodly behaviour. So that's the structure of the book, and we can see that, within that, we can see how it's all about separation. Separation physically with the wall, and then separation spiritually, as we shall see in the ways that they were to behave in their responsibility before God. But why did Nehemiah, who was a king's cupbearer in Persia, desire the challenge, the difficulties and the problems of going back to his people and building up the walls of Jerusalem? Giving up the life in the palace is a key question of the challenges that he faced. And I think we need to look at the motivation. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, phew. There is something there. There's a blank on there. So we're going to look at his motivation. Okay, and I found this interesting when I was looking at this, and hopefully you'll find helpful as well. So the great first thing we've got there, that his motivation to build. So let's open our Bibles, brothers and sisters, Nehemiah, if you haven't. Nehemiah chapter 1 here. There was great affliction and reproach of God's people. That's how he saw it. He associated himself, didn't he? Like the great characters of God, they associate themselves with their people. And so here in chapter 1 and verse 3, he has news through Hananiah, and he says, "And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity, there in the province, are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire." So after inquiring, he finds that they are in great affliction and reproach. Why? And then he goes to explain why they're in reproach and affliction, because the wall is broken down. The means of separation is not there. And the gates are burned with fire. There's open access to that place. It is no longer secure. It's no longer separate, is it? His personal reaction, brethren and sisters, was in verse 4. "And it came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." Hearing about the news about his fellow Jews in Jerusalem and Judea and their plight and their reproach, the God of Israel, because Israel was broken down, because Jerusalem was in that state, it reflected on the God of Israel, and therefore as a reproach against the God of Israel, caused him to weep, caused him to, as it says there, to mourn certain days. And it's the same motivation that he has later on. If we just turn over to chapter 2 and verse 17, when he comes to Jerusalem, and one of the reasons he says to the people for going forward and let's build, we see in verse 17, "He said unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof burn with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem." Why? "That we be no more a reproach." So it's the same idea, isn't it, coming through here, that his own personal response, and now before the Jewish leaders, was the same reason, the same motivation, that they would not be a reproach before their God. And if you go over to chapter 4, it's a little theme as we see coming through the book, chapter 4 then, and verse 4. We had it in our reading, didn't we? In Nehemiah's prayer, he desired in verse 4, "Turn their reproach," or "Hear, O God, for we are despised," and turn their reproach upon their own head. It's this idea they're reproaching you, Lord. We are building these walls for you. You have blessed us with this, as we shall see in a moment. And therefore he was praying for that reproach to go back on them. And then in chapter 5 we see it as going as well. In chapter 5 and verse 9, here when he's talking to the people of the land that were exacting usury, we're making it very difficult, we'll look at it later. But he says in verse 9, "It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God, because of the reproach of the heathen of our enemies?" So you can see it's a little theme, isn't it? The motivation. Look, this is the reputation of our God. The fact that it's all broken down, the fact that it's all in disrepute, in disrepair, etc., is reflecting on our God. And I don't want that. We want God to be honoured. We want God to be revered. And at the moment, that message is not getting out by the fact that Jerusalem is broken down and the gates thereof and the condition of the people. And therefore, that was his motivation. He did not want Yahweh, the God of Israel, to be disgraced, shamed by the condition of Jerusalem, the capital city of the Jews, and their behaviour. He wanted the Lord to be honoured and revered by the people around him. And obviously that's the motivation for us, isn't it? All these things are lessons for us. That's why we, do what we do, because we want to honour God. We want God's name to be honoured. And if we don't behave in certain ways, then we bring dishonour, don't we? And we can be a reproach to our God. It's that fear of God's name and his purpose is all linked into this as well. Let's go back to chapter 1, as we're looking at this motivation of Nehemiah, of why he wants to go forward and build. So Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 11 is one part of his prayer, as we know. He says, O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servants and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him great mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. So here, in the context of this prayer of looking into the place that you would set your name, and we know that was Jerusalem. In verse 9 we have that idea. He says, be attentive, please, to the prayer of your servant, who desire to fear thy name. Did you notice that? Fear the name of God, isn't it? Yeah? And prosper. The motivation was out of that reverential fear, brothers and sisters, for his God. A fear that would be translated into speech and behaviour. And it's the same idea that we saw it in, if we go over to chapter 2, verse 20, again, here talking to the elders. His own personal motivation he shared with the leaders when he came forward to that group in Judea, that group in Jerusalem, when he motivated them. Verse 20. Then answered I them, and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us, therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. God of heaven, he will prosper us. Notice that's the link we had in chapter 1, wasn't it? That fear thy name and prosper. It's the same idea. He's going to prosper us because we fear God, and we know if you fear God, then he will listen and he will help us. And in chapter 5, we looked at it, but it was there as well. I'll just remind you if you don't want to go there, but chapter 5 and in verse 9, we read it. Did you notice it says there about the fear of God again? We talked about the reproach in that verse, but it also says, ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God? A fear that would then cause them to behave in certain ways, speak in certain ways, and act obediently to the Spirit of the Lord. And then in verse, verse 15, it says that how he as the governor had not taxed them, verse 15, because of the fear of God. The former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people, and had taken of their bread and wine beside 40 shekels of silver, yea, even their servants bare rule over the people. But so did not I. Why? Because of the fear of God. And so this man was motivated by a fear of his God, a reverential awe, a respect, a desire to please him. And that fear of God overcame the fear of man. And that's a common theme through Nehemiah. We'll see later on how there was many things that were sought to make him fearful, who put the pressure on him, ultimately personally, to try and stop the building of the work. But his fear of God overcame them. That was superior. And that was a key motivation behind his desire to build the wall. And he recognized that God's providential care and blessing behind his personal desire. If we go back to chapter 2, when he's talking to the people about how he'd come forward to help them to build the walls, he indicates how that God was with him in his desire to do this. In chapter 2, we notice in verse 11, first of all, they came to Jerusalem, and then in verse 18, then I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And the response of them finding out that the hand of God was good upon him, it was, they said, let us rise up and build. So it was that, knowing that God was behind it, the providential care of God. If we go back to verse 8, you can see how he himself sees that God is behind this project of him desiring to go up to Jerusalem. His first personal prayer we saw in chapter 1, in verse 8 at the end of it. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. He gave him permission to go back. He even gave him a letter so he can have permission from those that are around for the materials to help me rebuild the wall. So that recognition that God was working with him, taking his personal desire and working with him, because he wasn't instructed to do this, but it was his desire, and God used that to further his purpose, that he then worked with him and He motivated him, the fact that God was with him. And that should motivate us, isn't it? It's not so easy for us sometimes. We look back to know the good hand of my God was upon me. But it's the same motivation for us, isn't it? You know, if we are doing the will of God, then his providential care, his blessing will go with that. You know, and we can work in all sorts of ways. You know, like sometimes we might be doing preaching efforts and we're hitting barriers and we pray about it and something opens up that we didn't expect. Or it might be other ways, so you can think of examples yourselves. And this is the key, really, as well, of all those other things. He wants to please his God. At the end of the day, he doesn't care what others think. He cares about what his God thinks. And because of that, he's able to stand up to some quite fierce challenges. Let's look at chapter 5 and verse 19. It's a theme that we'll start here and we'll end the day with as well. Chapter 5 verse 19, in the context we looked at verse 15, how he hadn't taken that which was the governor's because he fear of God. We noticed in verse 15 he now says, in verse 19, think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. It's not arrogant, as we shall see. It's not him arrogantly saying, oh, remember what I've done for you, Lord. This is I believe in you, Lord. I've served you, and I would desire you to remember me for the life that I've led and for what I've done for your people, because I've done it out of motivation to wanting to please you. And really that should be our motivation, isn't it? Wanting to please our God, wanting to please him in our lives. Nothing else counts in that sense, and therefore that allows us to have that strength to deal with challenges both internally and externally. In our last talk we shall see that we want to please our God as only his opinion counts. That should be the motivation. He wanted the reward of his faithful service to his God, to God's people, to be remembered favourably by the one whom he served. So what of us, brothers and sisters? Is that the motivation for your service to your God, my God, our God? Is it the fear of his name? Is it wanting to please him so that he's honoured? There's no room for pride, is there? There's no room for selfish ambition. The reward of men that are yielding in faith to the will of our Heavenly Father as we seek his favour, his guidance within the journey of our lives, wherever that may take us and when whatever we're given to do. Sometimes it takes us, and if we act in faith, it takes us outside our comfort zones, outside of where we think we would be or should be. Because God says you need to develop, you need to have this, to reveal things maybe about yourself that you have to then develop and learn and change, or so that you are in there as a position to help others. So what is the quality and the reasons why we serve, brothers and sisters? Let it be like Nehemiah. So let's consider then, that was the motivation behind his building. This is an insert that some of you might actually have in the Bibles. I don't know if you can see it clearly there. It's a little bit small. Basically, around the walls, we've got the sheep gate up here. And this is a illustration of all the people that were involved in the building. If we turn to chapter 3, please, that's where we get the details of all those that were building. So we'll keep that slide up there. If you've got the insert, it'll make it easier for you. If not, then hopefully you can refer to it there. And so we're now looking at the map then of the wall and the gate builders, and we've told about the condition of the wall. Okay, just context before we go to it. Proverbs is a very interesting proverb. Proverbs 24, verse 30 and 31 gives us a principle. It says there that the man and woman that is void of understanding, that's really important. We'll come to that in our second talk. It's like a stone wall thereof was broken down. The wall was broken down around the vineyard, I think it is in the case there, but because he was void of understanding. And so this wall of Jerusalem, brothers and sisters, actually demonstrates the spirituality of the people. When the wall is broken down, when the wall is in disrepair, when the wall is, is in decline, as it were, that it reflected their spiritual decline before God. When the wall was built up, when it was strengthened, when it was fortified, like under Hezekiah, it showed the spiritual revival of the people. And the wall is a very clear correlation between the state of the people and the wall. It seems to reflect. The two go together if you follow that through Scripture. And so here, it's no surprise, at chapter 3, we see the wall in disrepair. That reflected the people's spirituality, isn't it? And that's why Nehemiah's come back. He wants to improve that. And so here we have in verse 1. Then Elishib the high priest rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanctified it and set up the doors of it. even unto the tower of Meah, and sanctified it unto the tower of Hananeel. So the sheep gate is there, it's in the north. And we start with the sheep gate and we go round, and then we come this way, anti-clockwise, and then we go back to the sheep gate. It's kind of interesting we start with the sheep gate, isn't it? We'll think about that in a minute. But notice it says builded. We built the sheep gate and they set up the tower. Until I'd done this study, I hadn't realised we talk about the building of the wall. Actually, the building of the wall is only the first 3 verses. After that, it's all about repairing the wall, repairing the wall, repairing the wall. So the majority of it was actually repairing, taking materials that were there, the stones, and putting them back into place. The majority of it, but just this part, the northern part especially, up here, because obviously you've got your Kidron Valley here, the Valley of Hinnom here, and so this naturally is more defensive. It was more vulnerable here. It's the Babylonians, we're told, that took that part, or flattened the wall of Jerusalem in Jeremiah 52. They flattened the northern and the sort of western side, sorry. So it's really interesting how they build it. You look in verse 2, next to him, builded, men of Jericho, and then also verse 3, the fish gate. But then after that, verse 4, you get this idea of repairing, and we'll come to that in a moment. So we start with the high priest. We start with the high priest building, not any gate, but the sheep gate. No doubt your mind's going there already, isn't it? Yeah, in type. That we have here a lesson, don't we, to ourselves. That he built upon the foundation of his fathers. He didn't say, well, we're going to build something different. They were building where the foundations were of the fathers. He built upon that which had gone before. They're not building on a different foundation, but the one that, as I said, had gone before. The lesson to ourselves, brothers and sisters, we build on that foundation which is Christ. We know that. He's used as the foundation stone and the cornerstone, isn't he? Both. Christ, as we're told in John 10, who is the door to the flock of God. He is the gate. He is the sheep gate. Isn't that amazing how Scripture just starts there and says, look, this is all an allegory of the Ecclesia. It starts with Christ and it ends with Christ, the author and finisher of our faith, doesn't it? And that's how it starts this description in chapter 3. And brothers and sisters, our community needs to hold on to this, to the foundations of our beliefs, of our doctrine. We're under attack. There's various thoughts, aren't there? That, the doctrine, the stance on certain things are getting blurred a little bit, or being questioned, or being openly challenged, dare I say, in certain quarters. Summarised, yes, by the Word of God, and we've summarised it in a man's writing of the Birmingham Amended Statement of Faith. But it's the basis on which we meet, isn't it? It is the foundation. We build, we repair our ecclesias on what's gone before. We're not starting something new. They didn't start something new in Nehemiah's time. They went on the foundations that had gone before. Therefore, personally and collectively, our ecclesias need to build on that which has gone before, the heritage that we've had, that we may give to the glory to God. We may remain true to our beliefs and their implications, and not water them down as society pressures us as thoughts and the thinking of this world come in. And we notice as well, don't we, then from verse 4, I said to you, if you go through this word repaired, if you look at it, I think it comes 35 times in the rest of the chapter. Repaired, repaired, repaired. And it means to make strong, to restore, to secure. So literally they were taking some of the stones that were being broken down and putting them back. All the rubble and the rubbish that Nehemiah, when he went round to have a survey of it at night, they'd seen and it stopped him actually on his ass. It was around here. He couldn't get any further because the rubbish was so great, all the stones in the valley. So they were bringing those back up. The wood obviously had been burnt, and they'd been given permission to take new wood from the king's forest and use those to make the gates. And so it was made possible with that blessing, with repairing the wall, the majority of it being that they finished the wall in just 52 days. 52 days, brothers and sisters. What's that, 8 or 9 weeks? It's a phenomenal accomplishment, isn't it, with the blessing of God, especially when we consider the opposition they had. 52 days. If there's a real will in an ecclesia, and there's a real desire to work together, and there's a real unity, and there's a real desire to achieve the goal, then a lot can be achieved, can't it, in a short time. That's what he's showing us here. The lesson for us, brothers and sisters, the majority of our work is restoration, is repair in the ecclesia, isn't it? In the ecclesial walls, if we take that analogy. Yeah? often using that which has been disregarded or thought, oh, that's old-fashioned, we don't need that anymore, or whatever it may be. And we take that and we say, actually, we do need that. There was a very good principle why we had that. Yes, ecclesia's changed. The individuals in ecclesias change. It's a living organism with its different needs, and therefore we respond to that. Doesn't mean we don't change, but we don't change those things that are the bedrock, the foundation, the building, the wall that we're based upon. We have to repair breaches, don't we, in our ecclesial walls? They come into our ecclesias in different guises. See, there's nothing new under the sun. It's the same God, it's the same human nature, and it's the same challenges that we have now that Nehemiah had then. And therefore we need, brothers and sisters, don't we, to be like Nehemiah, to encourage, to work, that we may work together on this wall. And so we can see on the wall here the various elements. We've got various people now. I just want you to note, in case I forget to say, there's a lot of names on certain parts and there's a few names on others. Okay? And we'll come back to that a little later. So the restoration of the wall itself, 52 days. The wall was built, we're told in chapter 3, obviously onwards. And then we've got that idea of the wall being repaired for the rest of the chapter. Going through, repairing. And then we also have 4 towers, 1 chamber, and the broad wall. Some extra little details that are given to us as you go through the chapter. You can look at the verses there. I'm not going to read them for time. They were basically, the towers were like extra places of strength within the wall. They were incorporated. They weren't a separate tower somewhere else outside the wall or back from the wall. The wall came to the tower, there was the tower, and the wall continued, is the idea that we get. Those towers, brothers and sisters, would provide critical strength at critical points, as we saw on the map. And so you can think of the analogy of the ecclesia again. There might be individuals, a brother or a sister is like a tower of strength in our ecclesia. Or it might be a family. There's a tower of strength in our ecclesia that others find refuge and strength in, that unite those that are less spiritually strong within the ecclesial wall, who act like a watchman for the truth, because the tower obviously allows you to see at a further distance. You can see what's coming ahead, can't you? Yeah. To protect and warn maybe those that are new in the truth. So within this wall we have extra places of strength and security. And that's the analogy we can straight through to our ecclesias. There should be brothers and sisters, or there are, I'm sure there are, in your ecclesias, in mine, that are towers of strength, or families that are towers of strength that you can go to and you know you're going to get strength and refuge and support, and they're like watchmen for your ecclesia. And then you've got gates. 12 gates. That's interesting again, isn't it? When you go through chapter 3, you find 10 gates. And you think, hang on, there's 12, yeah? Well, actually, if you go to chapter 8, verse 16, that tells you about the gate of Ephraim. And chapter 12, verse 39, that tells you about the prison gate. That's how you get your 12 gates, because if you go through, there's only 10 in chapter 3. 12 gates allowing access from, I think we've got the map here again. No, we haven't. So just go back to here. So those 12 gates, you can see some gates are here. You've got some up here. You've got some here and down here. So from the 4 points of the compass is what the point I'm trying to make. So 12 gates that allow access into the ecclesia of God, but also guard the access to the ecclesia of God. A gate is something that could be closed. Something that opened, welcome, come on in. But something also closed and say, stop there. No, you cannot come in. Yeah, it's a gate that could be closed as well. And so those 12 gates, interesting 12, isn't it? Makes us think of the 12 tribes. Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel. These that came back to Judah, came out of the 12 tribes. We won't look at that, but it's there. They came from all the tribes. They're representing, obviously, the whole family of God. And there's an applications now. We need to welcome people into our ecclesias, the gates open, but also we need to guard what comes into our ecclesias and to keep those out that would harm our brethren and sisters. And we'll see more about that a bit later on. So obviously the builders that built this, were quite a lot of different people. As you go through chapter 3, you get a lot of different details. There they are, led by the high priest, and you go through and you can see various different groups there. There's quite a list of individuals here. I think there's 42 different groups, and they go through here, and they're all volunteers. Nobody came and said, you must do this. These were volunteers that said, we will do this. Let us rise up and build. They were motivated by Nehemiah's example. They were following him. They were galvanized by him to do these actions. And let's just consider some of these for a moment. If we take the Tekoites, quite a well-known example, in verse 5, we see that next to them, so on this wall being built, the Tekoites repaired. But their nobles put not their necks to the work of the Lord. It's interesting, isn't it? Their nobles did not put their necks to the work. The individuals did, but the leaders, it would appear, did not work. They did not build. And it's interesting, those could have easily said, well, our leader's not doing it, so we're not going to do it. They don't see the need, or they didn't volunteer, so why should I? But no, they didn't let apathy of their leaders as an excuse. They showed extreme dedication, even though they lacked the example of those that are honourable or powerful in this life, their elders. So much so that they were allowed to build that part of the wall, and you see in verse 27 they get another piece. And then the Tekoites repaired another piece over against the great tower that lieth at, even the wall of Ophel. And that was part of the valley, a very difficult part. Their dedication was used to build that part as well. And so there's a lesson there, isn't there? We can't use apathy of others to say, well, they haven't volunteered, so I'm not. Or I'd expect better from brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. Tekoites didn't use that as an excuse, did they? Nor should we. And if we consider some of the other things that we got there, goldsmiths, perfumers, they're not manual labourers, are they? Yeah? These are people that would do things, intricate work with their hands, intricate work that was very skilled. And here now they're volunteering to do physical, hard labour under the sun, under the dry summer that it would have been amidst the dust and very trying conditions of burnt stones and rubble, etc. These hands getting chaffed, getting dirty, getting calloused as they worked in that work. It was totally out of their normal occupation, brothers and sisters. This was a work they volunteered for that wasn't what linked with their natural day-to-day job, we could say. This was something that they did because they did it unto their God, and it took them out of their natural comfort zone of what they were familiar with to work for God. We also note that the one here, the family groups, is put there is Shallum and his daughters as you go through. Shallum and his daughters, not his sons, his daughters. Is that amazing? This man and his daughters built a very significant part. It was the part that was all down this side. Yeah, that big section that I said to remember to look at. And therefore, he didn't have sons, and he didn't say, well, I can't do anything. His daughters rose up and worked with him and built that large section of the wall. And there's an important point there as well, isn't it? Everybody has a role, brethren and sisters play a huge role in that building of the wall of the Ecclesia of God. And so, brothers and sisters, thinking of the lessons for ourselves of this building and how we've got individuals here, we've got obviously priests, haven't we? We've got Levites associated with the tabernacle of the temple of God, officiating in worship, not in manual building. Merchants as well, who are associated with the building as well, people who are in business. And so somewhere we can probably find someone that relates to us or something that relates similar to our occupation or something like that. And so what of us? When was the last time that I or you responded to a call for help? How many times do we help? Oh, can somebody so-and-so do this or do that? Or we need some people to do help with the billing or something with the hall or whatever it may be. We're always asking for volunteers, aren't we? We know the joy that if you're involved with organising something, when somebody comes to you and say, oh, I'll volunteer, here am I. Rather than going around and saying, well, would you mind doing it? Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just a difference, isn't there? You know, one volunteer's worth 10 pressed men, they say. And therefore, we should be volunteering, shouldn't we? Like these. Taking it out of our normal skills, normal environment, that we might say, well, I don't know anything about that. Well, then we can learn, can't we? We shouldn't let the failure of others, brothers and sisters, not to get involved in the work of the truth, be used as an excuse for us. The Tekoites didn't. And how important, as I say, the sisters are in our activities of the Ecclesia, of visiting, the phone call, of the writing, of the very small practical tasks. And the strength of that interaction of our sisters in our Ecclesia often give an indication of the strength of that Ecclesia. Sisters that are busy doing that during the time that most of the brethren are working, I know sisters work as well. But those that don't, then it does allow that contact. It does allow that sister and brother that needs to go to hospital to be taken that couldn't get there otherwise or easily. Yeah, it's all those things, and they're very important, aren't they? Many a time it's the sisters that have indicated things to brethren, so things can be done before they become critical issues before ABs. So there's just that word in season, or some actions taken, so that brother, that sister's put back or restored or helped, rather than things growing to bigger issues. And therefore we all need, don't we, brethren and sisters, to help the Ecclesia of God, to do what we can. So when you next get that desire for a need of volunteering in the Ecclesia, remember the example of the men and women in Nehemiah's day, and try to apply that we may all help one another. Those living stones, because that's what it is. We're living stones, aren't we, of the Ecclesia of God, to strengthen and build one another up, doing our part next to the next person in our Ecclesia, next to the next person. And we'll consider that now. Hopefully. Oh, okay. Just going to get some water here. So I just thought of some of the principles that came out of this building together. And the first thing is the walls are a reflection and strength of their spiritual fellowship. It's really, this was not done in isolation. If you look through chapter 3 again, there's two little words. I nearly had it read, but I thought it could take a little while. The words next, next, and after. Next to him, next to them, after him, after them. You go through, next, 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 after. Making the point that they weren't doing this in isolation, brethren and sisters. This was in work next to the person. You were working on your section of the wall, and the next to you was an individual working in his group, and the other side they were working next to you. So you were doing this amongst others. And this point is driven home, I think it's 26 times, that they built and they repaired alongside others. And therefore they provided strength and encouragement either side of the section, didn't they? It wasn't done by yourselves. It was, you could help each other out. The people working next to you, you had to work collaboratively. You had to talk to them. Where's your bit finishing and my bit starting? Yeah, it wasn't done, well, I'm just stopping there and tough luck if you're not up to there. Yeah, it was working together, wasn't it? Very clear. There wasn't any other wall being built. There wasn't, well, I'm building my wall, I'm putting a wall there, so you, brother or sister working there, don't come across that line. Yeah? It was one ecclesial wall. It was one continuous wall. And therefore, there was very clear in their sections. Let's look at verse 19 of chapter 3. You can see this. Next to him repaired Ezer, the son of Jeshua, the ruler of Mizpah, another piece over against the going up to the armoury of the turning of the wall. After him, Barak, the son of Zebiah, earnestly repaired that other piece from the turning of the wall. So you can see, turning of the wall is where one group stopped and another started unto the door of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. And after him repaired, and it goes on. You can see very clearly the sections being marked out. This word next to him is used in Numbers. If time, I might not go there. But Numbers 2, verse 4, where it describes the pitching of the tribes around the tabernacle of God. And it says in Numbers 2, verse 4, it says this, talking about Judah, which is interesting because we're looking at Judah's return. Yes, the mixed multitude in the sense that there was all Israel. But Judah, 74,600, were told, and those that do pitch next unto him, it's the tribe of Issachar. So this idea of pitching next, the fellowship of those tribes around the tabernacle of God, is the same word here being used as the brothers and sisters built the walls around Jerusalem, around the temple of God that had been established by Ezra earlier on. And so it's beautiful, isn't it? We have parallel between the builders working along each side each other, with the centre of their lives being the worship of God. Building together, using the common physical resources that were there as a means of protection and safety from outside, but also not putting barriers, as we say, between them. Putting barriers between those within the brotherhood, so that they may be a mutual benefit for all. We can also see, I think, the wall like this. It's one continuous wall being built by faithful men and women. Yeah? I've talked about the wall being like an ecclesial wall. But those groups could be like ecclesial groups, couldn't they? That could be rugby, and that could be Canuck, and that could be various others we've got here, All Green, etc. Yeah, all those ecclesias working on the wall. So it's like the brotherhood in a sense, the wall. Yeah. All working at different aspects on that wall. All working to see that the wall is continued, that it's revived, that we repair it, that it's there. And, this point. One continual wall over time being built by faithful men and women. You can also think of it through time. The majority of that wall has been built by brothers and sisters that now sleep in the dust of the earth. We're on that last little bit of the wall, as it were, if you look at it like a timeline, aren't we, before the kingdom of God? That we're just working on that last part, repairing that part as the brotherhood, as individuals, as ecclesias within that time. That have faithfully continued the building of the wall, that have continued that, have passed that on down through each generation, that it's come to our day and age. It's a continual process, brothers and sisters. There's no, well, it's finished, sit back, that's the end of it. Yes, they finished the physical wall in 52 days, but then there was still the wall of separation of their attitudes and their behaviour. And that was a continual process. And therefore it's the same for us. So you can look at it like that. And the process of building is more important than the outcome, as it develops living stones. See, that wall that was built by Nehemiah, history tells, would be smashed by Antiochus a few years later. So God was more interested in the characters that were being developed. In the trial and tribulation of building that wall and the challenges they had, how did they react to it? It wasn't the actual physical wall in that sense, but it was important. It's used as a reference point by Daniel in the numbering of the timetable of God to Christ. But what was crucial was the response of individuals in the testing. Would they remain faithful, or would they fall away? Would they continue with it, or would it just get too much and they wouldn't bother? Would they remain faithful or become dejected? And that's the same for us, brothers and sisters, isn't it? Will we continue to build the wall in our ecclesia, or are we going to fall away or become dejected or despondent or make excuses why we can't? And so there's some other principles that we want to see here. This is a very practical part, if you like, to see how we can help one another in the building of the wall. It says to assess the issue and what action needs to be done. This is what Nehemiah did. He didn't just sort of say, right, there it is, we're going to go ahead and do the work. He assessed the issue. Back in we go to chapter 2. Back to chapter 2 in verse 12, when he came to Jerusalem in verse 11, we find he does something. He says there that he arose in the night, I and some men with me. No, they told any man, verse 12 this is, that my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. And so he goes off and he makes a survey at night. Verse 16, and the rulers knew not whether I went or what I did. He went and assessed the need. Privately, he went, right, okay, let's look at the situation, what needs to be done. He assessed the act and he assessed what action needed to be done. And so he made responsible people for different sections of the wall. Do you remember I said that section of the wall over here had a lot of individuals? That section was particularly bad, was particularly ruined. So therefore he put a lot more individuals there to work together. He made people responsible for their section, having assessed their needs. He made that personal assessment. It was a secret survey. He divided the work according to the difficulty of the task into manageable sections. Yeah? Some sections had more individuals than others in building that section of the wall. This plan reflects, we can see it here, as we said, there's a lot of people working on that part, not so many on this one, in various sections, and in certain gates had more people helping them. So you can see that his plan, with the number of people involved, it would help the actual achievement of the goal of the wall being built. It wasn't equal sections for everybody. Some people had bigger sections. The task had been broken down in such a way to make the burden possible. It wasn't given to them and it was impossible for them to do. It was manageable for that group to do that task that ultimately allowed the wall to be built. Cooperation was needed with those associated with the task, becoming critical to everybody, that everybody cooperated to make sure all the wall joined together. Brother Robin read that, didn't it? The wall joined together. At that stage in chapter 6, it was totally linked. It was half the height, but it was linked. What else? He divided the work so that there is a benefit for the individual workers. Really interesting point this, I think. If we go to chapter 3, verse 28, it talks about in repairing the wall, they're also repairing their house, or it's linked to where their house is. From above the horse gate repaired the priests, everyone over against his house. And after them repaired Zadok the son of Immer over against his house. After him repaired also Shemaiah the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate. So they were building over against their house. They were building the wall that was either the house was in the wall, people like Rahab, we know that was the case, or it was very close to the proximity of the wall. So in building their wall, there was a bit of self-interest in here as well. There was a benefit to me. Well, I'm protecting my house, my family, my business. The merchants built the area where the business was carried out. So there was some profit to the individuals themselves in building that particular part of the wall. And he gave responsibility for work in their own locality. So obviously, the person building the wall here, the priest, didn't go across the waste time, energy and effort travelling across Jerusalem to go and build on another part of the wall. They built and worked on the area of their locality. Really important. Some of them, yes, didn't live in Jerusalem like Tekoites. They commuted, and therefore they were given a part. There was obviously probably not many houses, because we know it was depopulated. Because in the middle of Nehemiah we're told that there was not many houses in Jerusalem. And so there was a need for each group of local builders to take responsibility of their section of the wall and build that. Not to try and take over and take responsibility for a section of the wall that was a long way away. And the principles hold good, don't they? You know, we take responsibility in our ecclesia for our roles and responsibilities, manageable sections. We assess the need and they say, well, we need a group of people to do that, or we need an individual there, or that person would be fine doing that by themselves, but we need 4 or 5 over here doing this work. Or an ecclesia working here doesn't try to take responsibility for ecclesia, 50 miles away and tell them how to do it or what they should be doing. Yes, there can be contact. Yes, there's an inter-ecclesial fellowship. But it's this idea of having responsibility for your own and working on your own section and helping, obviously, the ecclesias nearby help that. As the analogy of the wall shows us that, doesn't it? So, brothers and sisters, there is that need, isn't there? And probably a need greater than before for inter-ecclesial fellowship and support, like we've got today. Because there are ecclesias sometimes that do need the strengths of another ecclesia nearby, just as that ecclesia needs to strengthen that ecclesia. Some of us have got ecclesias, there's a lot of children, and the needs, that are associated with that. Other ecclesias don't have that, but have a lot of elderly or other needs. Some ecclesias, we can see there's different strengths in certain ecclesias, and we need to share those strengths. A perceived lack in one can be the means of assistance that another can give. And so, some of you here know, Cannock's very much been trying to be doing that recently. Working with Stafford and working with Litchfield, 2 ecclesias, very small in size now, and trying to help them and support the brothers and sisters there as they help and support us as well in our development and our needs. And so there's that responsibility, isn't it? That everyone benefits from that inter-ecclesial fellowship, shown here through the example of Nehemiah. However, in the building of the wall there was a lot of opposition. It was not an easy thing. We know that. We read that little reading from Sanballat. We will consider the opposition more in the last talk, when we will consider, more importantly, how does he overcome it. Yeah? But I just want to show here that there's 12 types of opposition. I'm not going to turn them up. Obviously, I've just put it on the screen there. It's quite small where it is, but there's derision, isn't there? You start the work, laughter, derision. Then you have half-hearted brethren. We saw that, the nobles, they weren't going to do the work. Contempt. Then there's open opposition. Then there's someone getting fatigue and discouragement. Oh, this is hard work. There's a lot of rubbish. I don't know if I can continue this. Then there's sabotage, the talk of it. We'll come in, we'll do some sabotage and we'll withdraw. There's the fear of ambush. We'll take the strength of those that are going up to work on it. We'll attack them, and so that we'll put them in fear. And then there's strife and exploitation amongst the brethren themselves. Then there's false friendship, offers from those that are around. And then there's scandal. And then there's fear for his own life. And then there's treason. People are given allegiance to the other side, to the enemies. All those things that Nehemiah overcame in building the walls, brothers and sisters. 12 types of opposition. They increase in intensity. As we went through that, they get stronger. And they change from derision and laughter and mocking to then threats to then violence. And they go from a general thing to more and more to the specific. They realise Nehemiah's the leader. We'll take him out, the work will stop. Hence, you then get the false friendship. Hence, you get the scandal. Hence, you get the fear, where they try to put in the fear of his life and wanted him to do something that will compromise, as we shall see later. And we can see that they range from words to actions. They range from fellow builders to his brethren, to the outside, the enemies around. And throughout all that, Nehemiah puts his trust in God. He does what he can to improve the situation, but he trusts in his God. Sometimes he just prays. Sometimes he prays and takes action. But in all of those, as we shall see in our last talk, he is able to overcome and find a solution and find a way of seeing that opposition off, that the wall may be finished in leading God's people. And so the wall was built. And they're the verses that tell us where it was built and how it was built, brothers and sisters. The wall was linked to half the height. We see that in chapter 4. We read that, didn't we? And then we see in chapter 6, the wall's there, but there's no gates, so it's open. Then we see how the wall's finished on the 25th day of Hula. If we go to chapter 6, if that's how say, Elu. Chapter 6 and verse 15. So the wall was finished in the 20th and 5th day of the month Ulu, in the 5th and 2 days. So that's the 52 days. And that's when it was finished, brothers and sisters, in that time. It took just 52 days to complete. The walls are then secured with the doors in chapter 7. We find that at the beginning of that chapter there. And then their enemies' reaction to all this in verse 16. And it came to pass that when all our enemies heard thereof, and all the brethren that ran about saw these things, they were much cast down in their own eyes. For they perceived that this work was wrought of God. Despite everything they did, despite all their strategies, all their cunning, all their planning, the work continued. And the work was completed, wasn't it? If God be for us, who can be against us, is the idea, isn't it? That, unless the Lord build the house, they labour in vain. It was accomplished in that time. An amazing feat that those in opposition, who they were cast down in their own eyes. The idea there is that they were, they'd fallen from grace. They'd lost great self-esteem because everything they'd done had been thwarted in trying to overcome. And it's beautiful, isn't it? Psalm 126 says, 126 verse 1 and 2 says, when the Lord turned again the captivity of Zion, we were like them that dream. Then was our mouth filled with laughter and our tongue with singing. Then they said among the heathen, the Lord hath done great things for them. And here's an illustration of that psalm, or looking back, thinking of how the Lord had done great things. The heathen acknowledged that the Lord was behind this. When they saw that indeed the walls had been completed. An amazing feat, brothers and sisters. Out of all the opposition internally and externally, the walls were completed. The walls with 12 gates. It's beautiful. What are you thinking of? No doubt you're thinking of something like this, aren't you? New Jerusalem, eh? 12 gates. Let's go there. I hadn't realised how it emphasises the wall. Let's go to Revelation 21. As we come to the end of our first study. Revelation 21 then. You can see all the points there, but we notice the New Jerusalem in verse 1. New Jerusalem is a bride. We know it's the saints. Verse 9, talking of the bride again, the Lamb's wife. We'll just read verse 10 to verse 12 and then we'll pick out the points. And he gathered me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto the stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, as crystal, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels, and the names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And then it goes on to describe that, doesn't it? How there are 12 gates in verse 14. The wall of the city had 12 foundations and the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. But it emphasises the wall. I've never seen that before. Verse 12, the wall great and high. Nehemiah's wall in the end was great and high. And it was built on the foundations, wasn't it? 12 gates. We have 12 gates here, brothers and sisters. The links are wonderful, aren't they? And it's about the living stones. It's about us in the Ecclesia of God, in the brotherhood. Now, building characters to the glory of God. The saints are those living stones that by the mercy and grace of our God will be you and I. You and I with brothers and sisters that we've known and loved that are no longer with us. They sleep in the dust of the ground. And with the great characters that we read of in the Bible, as individuals like Nehemiah, that we hope to be part of that new Jerusalem within the future. The majority, as I say, that sleep in the ground, waiting for that day when they hope that God will remember them for good in their building in the Ecclesia of God.